I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional rightful owners of the land on which the University of Sydney is built and the land on which we assemble this evening, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. My name is John Keane. I am Professor of Politics here at the University of Sydney. And ladies and gentlemen, señoras y señores, I wanted to say that I'm really delighted to welcome you to this last summer's day evening, a rather dreary summer's day evening to the University of Sydney, to an anatomy of writing and politics, memory and democracy. Many people have worked tirelessly to bring us together this evening. Laura Cretch at the Adelaide Writers' Festival, at the 2012 Adelaide Festival. The Instituto Cervantes, I wanted to thank Isidoro Castellanos, the director, and José Luis Perales. I wanted to thank Meredith Hall from Sydney Ideas, and I wanted to thank very much Zoe Morrison from the Sydney Democracy Initiative. And I wanted to say, of course, a warm muchas gracias. Thank you very much to all of you and for your efforts and for coming tonight, but our warmest thanks go to a magnanimous traveler, a man of letters who I think deserves the title of this evening's Señor de la Casa, Spain's most celebrated contemporary writer, Javier Cercas. He is well known to you. He's the author of 9 books, many shorter texts and translations, and his most recent work, as you know, is The Anatomy of a Moment, which was described by London's Times Literary Supplement as the very best history book of the year 2011. It is a controversial account of the failed coup d'etat in Spain in February 1981. Javier Cercas has won many prizes, both in Spain and internationally. For example, the Premio Salambo, the International Foreign Fiction Prize in the United Kingdom, and the Athens Prize for Literature in Greece. He's a regular contributor to the Catalan edition of El País, and he lives in Barcelona. Will you please join me in warmly welcoming him tonight? Señor Isidoro Castellanos, who is director of the Instituto Cervantes, would like to say a few words.
Good evening. It is now 2.5 years since the Instituto Cervantes opened its doors to the public here in Sydney. The Instituto Cervantes, for those of you who get in contact with this organization for the very first time, is Spanish public institution for the teaching of Spanish and the dissemination of the Spanish-speaking country's culture. As a matter of fact, we are located just across Victoria Park on City Road. The University of Sydney is therefore our closest neighbor. Since then, since we opened our doors to the public, the University of Sydney and the Instituto Cervantes have been organizing very many events, very many activities. We have organized symposiums, conferences, congresses, even concerts. Having said that, the organization of this particular event is, from my perspective, an example of cooperation between two organizations, the University of Sydney and the Instituto Cervantes, working together to achieve a common goal. It is with this activity that somehow we have reached the climax, the highlight of our cooperation so far. Because having Javier Cercas here with us tonight to talk about an anatomy of writing and politics, memory and democracy, besides being a tremendous effort, is also an honor and a pleasure. Because Javier Cercas is, I should say, Spain's most celebrated contemporary writer at the moment. And nobody better than him is able to go deeper and deeper into our contemporary history and show it in his historical novels. Javier, it's a pleasure to have you here tonight with us, and thanks very much for coming. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let us set the scene for tonight's discussion. Imagine a country very rich by global standards, a country with a democracy, including free elections, a prosperous place where many millions of people feel comfortable, proud of their land, enjoy excellent food and wine, sunshine, and sport. Is this country of the imagination Australia? No, it is Spain, a civilized European country where just a generation ago things were often otherwise chillingly different. A country, Javier Cercas writes in his Soldiers of Salamis, that was, as I quote, submerged in a savage orgy of blood. A territory defined, and I continue to quote, by roads invaded by interminable caravans of refugees, soldiers in uniform of every rank wandering the countryside, desperate and driven to theft, enormous piles of weapons and equipment left in ditches. A broken and bleeding country peppered with concentration camps. Actually, he calls them death traps, like, for example, the border camp at Argelis. It was a particularly sad camp because it was a place that contained those who had fled from the violence and terror of the Franco victory. It was a nightmare, he writes, in which was really just a bare, immense beach surrounded by a double ring of barbed wire. There were no huts and no protection from the savage February cold, and no sanitation, just a quagmire, where in subhuman conditions, with women and old folks and children sleeping on the sand, dappled with snow and frost, and men wandering around, dumbfounded by the burden of desperation and the rancor of defeat, 80,000 Spanish fugitives waited for the hell to end. Javier Cercas, how does a civilized, democratic country like Spain handle the gap between that kind of hellish reality of the past and the normal present? Should people even bother with minding the gap? Why not just forget, let bygones be bygones? To hell with the remembrance of things past. Live for today, for a better tomorrow. Why?
That's a difficult question, but before answering this question, trying to answer it, I don't have the answer. I don't have answers, I just have questions. That's why I'm a novelist. But let me tell you a story before that. The first time Roman Jakobson, the great Russian linguistics, went to Harvard, he was welcomed by the president of the university, who told him, "Oh, Mr. Jakobson, somebody told me that you speak 14 languages." And he said, "Yes, it's true, but I speak all of them in Russian." I speak English, but I speak in Spanish. So, sorry if I make mistakes. Thank you very much, John, for your introduction. Thank you very much to the Instituto Cervantes. The question is very difficult. I mean, my first answer is, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going to. That's for sure. I mean, Faulkner said, past never passes. I mean, past is always here. I would say that at least a certain past, of which we have still memories. This fact that past still is a form of the present has been a discovery for me. I mean, I discovered that writing precisely Soldiers of Salamis. Before Soldiers of Salamis, I wrote it when I was, I published the book when I was 39 years old. Before that, well, nobody read my books, not even in Spain, except my mother, and some friends, but not a lot of friends. I would say a sort of postmodernist writer in the sense that, well, my heroes were Borges, Kafka, these kind of things. And the past, for me, didn't exist. as a literary problem. Of course, I was interested in history and so on and so forth. But my books didn't work with that. It were present books, just present. They talk about the present. And especially they didn't talk about, the Civil War, because the Civil War was so boring thing, it was for me and my generation. We are the grandsons of the Civil War, was something that we hate. We weren't interested in it. It was awful, blood, an orgy of blood, and and there were so many films and so many books, novels, blah blah blah. So we didn't want to talk about that. In fact, we didn't exactly want to be Spanish writers. We wanted to be American writers, European writers, wherever. Anyway, writing this book, I wrote this book when I came from the States. I was living for 2 years in the States. And then I became aware that I was Spanish. I began to sleep siesta and things like that. And writing this book, I discovered that past is present, is a dimension of the present. I mean that past is not something that is there, quiet, still, and has no relationship with the present. No, the present without the past is not fully present. We can't understand what is happening now without understanding what happened then. So the past is a dimension of the present. And also, that's another thing that I discovered, the collective is a dimension of the individual. You cannot understand yourself without understanding the collectivity in which you are inscribed. I mean, your country, That was my main discovery at that point. So why we should care about the past? Because without the past, we cannot understand the present.
Isn't there another and pretty obvious reason if you go to the Valley of the Fallen outside of Madrid, which is that the Franco regime committed itself to the preservation of the past, that it was in its monuments, in its plaques, in its slogans, it was dedicated to defying forgetting, that it wanted the whole of the population to remember its version of what happened, so that not so long ago, priests were beatified, several hundred. If you go to Spanish churches, you will find plaques to the glory of the fatherland. And the Valley of the Fallen, for any of you who have been, and if you haven't, when you go, be prepared for a shock. The enormity of the cross and the enormity of this space is a living testimony of one version of the past, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a fascist monument. Yeah, for a long time we have had in Spain one version of the story. I mean, after the Civil War was the first act, you must know that. I mean, this is the most important thing, probably. I mean, it was 1936, 1939, so it was previous to the Second World War, and was the first act of the Second World War. That's very important to say that. I mean, it is not a different, in the end, it is not a different war. I mean, they were fighting fascism, communism, I mean, the same, with differences, of course, but the same, more or less the same forces. So how that terrible country with this orgy of blood and so on came to be a prosperous, in this moment in crisis, but a prosperous European country, and so on and so forth? Well, through a dictatorship of 40 years, from 39 to 75. And during these 40 years, more or less, there was only one version of history, of course, the version of the people who won, meaning the version of Franco's. Franco's version. I've said the past is present. Well, the real point was how to, and the originality, because in the end, civil war was not original of Spain. I mean, it was, as I said, the first act of the Second World War. Civil war is not original in Spain, not even in Europe. I mean, in Spain, national sport is not, as you may suppose, football. It's civil war. I mean, during more than 2 centuries, we were killing each other all the time. I mean, and it's not only the national sport. I mean, civil war is the national sport in Spain, but war is the continental sport in Europe, because there has not been 2 weeks or a month in the last millennium in which Europeans have not killed each other. So this is not original. What is original? What was original at the moment was the way in which we changed a dictatorship. At the beginning, a fascist dictatorship. At the end, simply a dictatorship. I mean, Franco's dictatorship for democracy in the 70s. That's the story that I tried to tell in my last book. And this is really original because, and it made, you're a political scientist, and in my opinion, it began a model. Because what happened? At the end of Franco's era, when Franco died, I was 13 years old, and I felt, everybody knew in Spain that the idea was we're going to go again to our national sport. We're going to kill each other again. Not only people, not only a kid like me felt that, or my parents or whatever. Political scientists, people very serious. Okay, after Franco is going to be another war because, for a number of reasons. The thing was that there was no war, so that there was a pacific transition from a dictatorship to a democracy. That was original. That was very strange. And as far as I know, it was the first time that something happened, that I know. After that, of course, there was the Spanish model was exported, in a sense, to Latin America, to, the transition from the dictatorships in the 70s and 80s to democracies, and then also even to the East countries in Europe, after the fall of the Soviet Empire, and so on and so forth.
And yet, in this transition, there was a price.
Yes.
Silence about the past. And so I come back to you to ask you about the injustice of the silence, the unfairness, and you've already pointed out that the monuments to the past are one-sided. But could it be also that forgetfulness of the past damages characters? It may be an unfortunate cliche, but what about the problem of mutual mistrust, quiet hatreds? You know the old remark, how does a Spanish joke begin? It begins by looking over your shoulder. To what extent did this silence actually poison the society, or has it poisoned the society? And you see yourself as a writer trying to undo this, to overcome these mistrusts and patterns of hatred.
It's difficult for me to explain that. I don't know the audience, the knowledge of the audience of the Spanish history, and it is not only a Spanish problem, of course. My books are not about Spain. Spain is an excuse to talk about this is my view of it, about some political, especially moral issues. But anyway, there is a cliche in which the idea is, okay, how we do to pass from a dictatorship to a democracy? Through a pact of oblivion. That's the word they use. That's the cliche. So let's not talk about the past. Just go to the future, as you said. And don't talk about it. Don't talk about the war. Don't talk about Franco's era. And don't talk about these kind of things. Okay, that's what I must tell you, John. That's more a historical cliche. And 10, 11 years ago, when I wrote Soldiers of Salamis, I mostly believe in it. Okay, then, like 4 or 5 years ago, when I began to write my last book, which is a crazy book, called The Anatomy of Moment, I went back to this period of the transition, of the Pact of Oblivion, and I discovered an obvious thing, that it wasn't true. I mean, everybody talked about, and I remember it very well, in Spain, everybody talked about the past. I mean, as I told you, books, films, magazines, newspapers, everybody talked, I mean, it was everywhere. So there was not a Pact of Oblivion. There was my formulation now, my way of putting things now, it's on the contrary. There was a Pact of Forgetting. In which sense? I mean, from a political point of view, what the political class decided, but not the right wing or the left wing, nor the heirs of Franco and the heirs of, the leftists or Republicans, whatever. No, all the political class decided not to use the past as a political weapon. That's very different. That's very different. And why did they decide that? Not because they forgot, but because they remembered very well what happened 40 years ago. So they decided not to use that as a political weapon. And not to enter into some problems which were difficult or impossible to solve. I'm going to put you an example of what I'm meaning. It's very easy. The Anatomy of Moment talks about the last coup d'etat in Spain. It was 1981. Some civil guards entered. Maybe you've even here in Australia, because these images are the most famous images in the recent Spanish history, or in Spanish history. The civil guards entering the parliament, shooting and trying to make a coup d'etat.
It's all on YouTube.
It's all on YouTube, yes. Okay, that day, and this is hard to say, and I have problems for saying the obvious, nobody went to the streets to fight for democracy. Nobody went like, Egyptians to the Tahrir Plaza to, fight against the putschists, or whatever you call it. I mean, against the militaries who were trying to organize a coup d'etat. Everybody stayed at home. I remember perfectly, I went to that day, I arrived from the university, 6:30, and my mother told me, who was a kid when the Civil War, but she remembered very well. She was 6, 7 years old, but the idea and the feeling, and she was, cleaning or wherever, and hearing the radio, and the coup was in the radio. And she told me, Javi, when I arrived home, and of course she knew that it was a coup d'etat, of course, and it was the war. And I said, okay, I want to go back to the university. And you might think that I was going back to the university to fight for democracy. No, it's not true. I wanted to go back to the university because there was this girl that I loved. And I thought, well, this is the moment to, history comes to me to, okay, anyway. What she did at that moment was taking me and saying, you don't go there. You stay at home. Of course I went because the girl was wonderful. And this reaction of staying at home, don't do anything, this is called fear. And that was the reaction. Why? Because there was not something called oblivion in Spain at that moment, because all the transition from dictatorship to democracy was made out of remembering all the time, take care, if we don't behave, there's going to be again a war. Okay, so a pact of remembering. Of course there was oblivion. Of course there were things that were put apart. Let's say, don't do it. And of course now we have things like, as you know very well, I believe, for newspapers and Garzón story. I went out from Spain not to talk about Garzón, but it's inevitable to talk about Garzón.
We'll talk about Garzón in a minute.
Yeah, no, but we have, for instance, no, I'm finished. Yes, the other side of the story is that we didn't use it politically, but we didn't do things which were important. We cannot have thousands of people, you know, in the roads without honorable thumb and so on and so forth. That's a real problem that we have, and Garzón tried to solve it because the state didn't do it. But that's not a problem.
Perhaps just to complete this first section on the effects of this pact of forgetting, I'm very struck by, in Soldiers of Salamis, the melancholy that surfaces at several points in the novel, and it's to do with this song, this Paso Doble, sighing for Spain. It's first introduced in the Soldiers of Salamis in a scene where actually Romani people are playing and singing this song. And even if you know nothing about this song as an outsider, one feels melancholy, one feels actually dragged down somehow by one of the effects of this pact of forgetting. Terrible things happened in the past, which cannot openly, publicly be talked about. But this produces a certain melancholia, does it not?
Yeah. It's a melancholic book in a sense, yeah.
Very.
But in another sense, is the happiest book I've written in my life I'm going to write. Don't you think so? Because the book, I mean, of course the Spanish Civil War is important in the book, but it's not that important. There's something much more important in my opinion. And that's why it's the happiest book I'm going to write in my life. Because it talks about a guy, it talks about heroism.
Yes.
In the proper sense of the word. I mean, it talks about a guy who saves the life of another guy who is his enemy, who does something really honorable, brave, and I mean, he's a hero. The word hero, I mean, I think my last 3 books are trying to understand what means the word hero. As a kid, I mean, we all love the idea of heroes. I love the idea of heroes, you know, in wars, and what is the meaning of this word that has been used so badly. I think that this guy in Soldiers of Salamis is a real hero, and in this case we're talking about a pure, a noble human being, or at least about a human being who in one moment was pure and noble, and that's why the book is, in a sense, you're absolutely right, totally melancholic. It talks about a possibility of, well, it talks about I don't know. Yes, I know about what. It talks about the deaths. I mean, it talks about moral issues from my point of view. The book talks about the fact that people who die are not totally. It talks about a poem. In fact, the subject of the book, I found it after writing the book, a poem by Thomas Hardy, which is a poet I love, called The Second Death. And Hardy says, in the first death, we are not totally we are totally dead. Because if, I don't know, tomorrow I die, John would say, oh yes, I remember this Javier Cercas, I was with him. We had coffee and this conversation. So I'm not totally, I'm not totally dead. I'm still living in John's memory but what is the real death, the second death, when nobody remembers you? Mm-hmm. And the fact, all the time the book talks about that, about the fact that when people die, they grasp, how the dead people grasp to the people who are alive, mm-hmm. because they want to go on living. Mm-hmm. That's in my opinion, the subject in the end of the book. But I insist, that's why maybe the book is optimistic. I mean, it's a melancholic book, but it's an optimistic book. It talks about heroism, about bravery, about the possibility of virtue, mm-hmm. finally. So there is a possibility of virtue. It's incredible, isn't it?
It is. Let's come back to it in a moment. I want to talk to you before opening it up to the audience about your methods. Quite a few controversies aroused by your particular style of literary history. Soldiers of Salamis, as you've rightly and powerfully just said, and if one reads it, one finds this overwhelming. I think it's a novel of remembering. It's an attempt to come to terms with very complicated past, with no good guys and bad guys, friends and enemies, that's overcome. But its methods have been dubbed by some observers as postmodern. It's certainly not a straightforward form of literary history, and it's certainly not transparent. At one point in this novel, Javier Cercas says in the novel, quoting his Chilean friend Roberto Bolaño, that who gives him the advice, if you can't find the details, just make it up. I mean, tell a lie. And you then lie to him, or Javier Cercas lies to him in this scene and tells him that you're not writing a novel. Actually, what you're doing is you're telling a story, or trying to tell a story with real events and characters, what you call a true tale. I mean, that's a true oxymoron. At another point, you tell your fortune-telling television friend, Conchi, that you refer to like a novel, except instead of being all lies, it's all true. What's going on here?
Yeah.
You say you don't make up the past, and actually this novel is full of incredibly interesting methods and efforts to track down the facts. And yet, you're not telling the facts. So what are you doing? You're not lying? You're not telling the way things really are? What kind of hybrid stuff is
lying.
This?
I'm a liar, you know.
You're lying now?
Yes,
as you tell me you're lying?
No, wow. Now I'm not lying, because now I'm living. But a novelist is a liar. A liar that tells the truth. I mean, writing a novel is telling a lie through which we can get to a deeper truth. I mean, you remember this distinction by Aristotle, which is very, very, very important. Aristotle said, there is the historical truth and there is the literary truth. Aristotle said the poetical truth. The word literary didn't exist at that moment. Okay, so there are two truths that are contradictory in themselves. The historical truth is a factual truth. It's a concrete truth. The historian looks for what happened at a certain moment to certain people at a certain place. Instead, on the other hand, we have the poetical truth, literary truth, which is an abstract truth, a moral truth, a universal truth, looks for what happened to everybody at every place, in every time. This is the literary truth. So I, as a novelist, look for, essentially, the moral truth. And how can I get to there? I get there through a lie. I mean, inventing, creating a world of its own, which is part fact and part fiction. I mean, of course, if I could translate a quotation by Gorgias. Okay, I'm going to say it in Spanish and then I'm going to try to translate it because everywhere is here in this sentence that says Gorgias. Poetry es un engaño. Engaño means deceit. No? Is there a translator from the English to Spanish? Es un engaño. La poesía es un engaño en el que quien engaña es más honesto que quien engaña es más honesto que quien no engaña y quien se deja engañar más sabio que quien no se deja engañar. Okay, so translation.
True translation, please.
True translation. Poetry, so fiction, so literature, is a deceit, engaño, deceit, in which the guy who deceits is more honest than the guy who doesn't let himself deceive. No, quien engaña es más honesto que who deceits is more honest than who doesn't do it, and who lets himself being deceived is more intelligent, sabio, sage, than the one who doesn't let himself do it. Yeah, more or less. So that's the way it works. I mean, of course, the narrator of Solis of Salamis says, this is a true tale. But this is what the narrator says. The first thing we must learn when we read the novel is not to think that the narrator always says the truth.
Yeah.
This is the first thing. I mean, you remember, in Spain, we have the best novel of the history. I mean, the best one, which is El Quijote. After that, all disaster. No, I mean, we invented the novel. That's incredible. And it's incredible. I mean, Borges, which is one of my literary heroes, says, the first time I read El Quijote, I read it in English. And then when I read it in Spanish, I thought that the translation was okay. And it's a boutade, of course, but it's very intelligent because you English-speaking people learn the lesson of Cervantes sooner than we. And you know, Sterne and Fielding and all these people, and we lost the novel. That's a pity. Anyway, in my opinion, this is the best novel ever written. And what says Cervantes at the beginning of the book? What says all the time? He says that he's not the author of the book. He doesn't invent the history of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. He's just transcribing a history by an Arab author. But of course, this is a lie. This is not true. As it's not true that this is a true tale. This is a true tale in historical terms. I mean, there is a part in which I talk about, a fascist character called Sanchez Mazas, which obviously is true, even though not even in Spain a lot of people knew at that moment that existed. Anyway, Franco, I didn't invent Franco, I didn't invent the Civil War. I mean, all the details of the history, big history, are historical, are truth. But there is a moment when I worked as a historian, and then I went to a wall. I couldn't go farther than that. And then I worked as a novelist. So this is fiction. This is a novel. Instead, the case of, if you let me finish with this, because this is a very complicated subject. The case of The Anatomy of a Moment is totally different. Because, it would be hard to talk about it. If you want, we can talk about it. In The Anatomy of a Moment, there is no fiction. There is no fiction. It is a strange book. It is the strangest book I've read, I've written, and probably, I don't know, it's a very strange book because, and probably it's an impossible book in the sense that it looks for, at the same time, the historical truth and the literary truth. I mean, I don't invent anything. There is no fiction in this book. And why there is no fiction in this book? There is no fiction in this book because of this. When I began this book, I always begin the books with images. I mean, the goal of my books is trying to understand or to formulate an enigma, a question, an image. And the image in this case, the question in this case was that moment I told you about. The moment, 1981, in which these soldiers entered the Spanish parliament firing, and trying to make a coup d'etat. But I saw this, I've seen, this image is the most the famous image in the recent history of Spain, or in the history of Spain. And one day, on 25th anniversary of the coup d'etat, I was interested in this, as everybody is, in Spain. And that moment, you know, the newspapers, everybody talk about the thing. It was 25th anniversary. And, you know, these images, we see these images in Spain every 2 weeks, more or less, for one reason or another. They're all the time in TV. Okay, so it was 11:30 or something like that. I was drinking whiskey at that time. I drank whiskey. And in the moment, I saw, again, these images that I've seen thousands of times. And I discovered one thing, which was extraordinary for me. There were 3 guys who didn't die for cover at that moment. I mean, when the civil guards were firing. But there were 3 guys that didn't die for cover. I mean, all the parliament was diving for cover. The parliament was nobody there, except 3 guys. And I say, hey, man, why these 3 guys? What are they doing here? I love these questions. I love it's the question my kid, he's 17 years old, but would put, or a kid of 10 years old. I mean, I love this question. Why apples fall down and don't fall up? Newton made quite something of it, no? So I say, why this? Okay, so I began to work on this, and I discovered that the story is a bit longer. I tried to make a fiction fact thing, like Soldiers of Salamis, with this story. I worked for 2 years, full time, and at one moment, I discovered that what I was trying to write, it was a total disaster. And I wanted to commit suicide, but instead I went to holidays with my family. And in these holidays, I read the first sentence of the book in an article by Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco said in an article that according to a poll, 25% of the Britons think that Winston Churchill is a fictional character. And I said, yeah, wait a moment. What I discovered, what I understood, is that this coup d'etat, it's called in Spain the 23rd February coup d'etat, the last coup d'etat, is, let's say, our Kennedy's assassination. So it's a big fiction. It's an enormous fiction. It's the exact point where all the devils, the demons of our recent past converge as the Kennedy's assassination. It's an enormous fiction because, you know, what is a Spanish guy? A Spanish guy is a guy who has a theory on the coup d'etat, 23rd February coup d'etat. This is a Spanish guy. If you meet somewhere a guy who says, I'm a Spanish, and he has not a theory on the coup d'etat, he's not a Spanish guy. You can say, and why this? Because it's a national obsession, and because you can say whatever you want about it. There are no documents, so historians have not talked about it. Just journalists with a lot of, you know, they want to write really fast. I love journalism,
So this is Borges' idea of the labyrinth of memory. It's very complicated terrain. And just to round this out, I'm getting the impression that the way you play with fact, fiction, conjecture, lies, truth, is actually, it has the effect of opening up your novels to the reader. I mean, in a way, the reader is required to decide for herself or himself. What is the truth of the past? What happened? Which evidence is missing in The Soldiers of Salamis? We still don't know at the end, after reading this and crying. We do not know which courageous soldier chose not to shoot the first and the leading fascist ideologue. So, am I right in thinking that there is something deliberate about the way you play with all of these terms, because you don't see yourself as a priest of literature?
No, not at all. As a priest of literature.
Yes.
Yeah. Meaning a guy who has the truth.
Yes.
Yes, I don't have the truth. I don't have the truth. No, that's what I said, that we novelists have, we must have answers. We must protect questions from the answers. We don't have answers. We don't have answers, we have questions. All my books, I discovered that all my books, or the majority of my books, are like this. There is a question at the beginning. Why the soldiers of Salamis? Why a soldier didn't kill a fascist ideologue at the end of the Civil War when everything led him to kill him? Why he didn't do it? Why? Last book. Why Adolfo Suárez, which was the president, the architect of transition, of the president of the government who did the transition from dictatorship to democracy, why he stayed in his place in the parliament instead of diving for cover? Why he, especially he? Why precisely he? Why he did that, which is totally crazy. I mean, if they shoot at you, you just dive for cover. I would go to the basement, definitely. And okay, there is a question. And the narrator and myself begin a quest. So looking for the answer. And at the end of this quest, there is no answer. Mm-hmm. The answer is that there is no answer. The answer is the quest itself, the book itself. So I write not to give answers, but to formulate the questions in the most complex possible way.
And very striking is that the revisiting of the 23rd of February attempted coup d'etat and the Civil War is your openness to the evidence, to characters. In Soldiers of Salamis, Javier Cercas, not you, has a TV fortune teller friend, Conchi, who is constantly going on to you, the writer, saying, you should write about a communist. I mean, these fascists are bastards. And yet, the whole novel is, some part of the novel, a third of the novel, is, so to say, a rehabilitation of Sanchez Mazas. A character, skinny, emaciated, converted to fascism in Italy, impressed by Mussolini, a lover of letters, Jewish, a man who miraculously escapes being shot, who goes on to become the poet and the writer for Franco. Someone who turns out to be uncourageous. He disappears, so to say, into oblivion. He doesn't have any morals. He doesn't stick to anything later. And at one point in the novel, the writer says, well, perhaps he should have been shot. And yet, the novel keeps alive memory of Sanchez Mazas for posterity. A character who tells us quite a lot about the ethos of that period and its degeneration into what I think you call slop in the novel. I mean, the end stages of the Franco period. But am I right? This is an act of generosity. You write about a fascist.
I wouldn't say it's an act of generosity. I would say that I'm trying to understand a fascist. And I mean, my family is a family of Frankist people. I try to understand a fascist. Why a intelligent, cultivated guy became fascist? I try to understand the other. Maybe this is a moral and political, it's compulsory. Why this happened? I remember, do you remember this film by, I don't remember, yeah, but Bruno Ganz, it was the End of Hitler. There were different titles. The End of Hitler by Bruno Ganz as Hitler. The Last Days of Hitler.
Der Untergang, the downfall.
The downfall. Yeah. I remember that there was in Germany, there's this big polemics and discussion. And people like Wenders, Wim Wenders, saying, well, this film is bad and is morally wrong, politically wrong, because it presents Hitler as a human being, being nice to his wife and to his secretary and loving him. Well, I think exactly the contrary. We must, the problem is that Hitler was a human being. He was not, he didn't came from Mars. He was like you and me. And he originated a global enthusiasm, not only in Germany, but around the world. And why did this happen? And why this crazy bastard, this total crazy man, got to power and fascinated the world? We must understand that. Mm-hmm. What the great writers do is exactly that. Shakespeare tries to understand an assassin, and Dostoevsky tries to understand assassins and people, awful people. Because this is also the human nature. All this is the human nature. So we must understand that. I was trying to understand the fascist. I was trying, not only that, in the last book, I tried to understand also how a fascist guy educated in Franco's era, like Adolfo Suarez, becomes a hero of democracy. How is it possible that? I would say that this is it's not generosity. I try to understand. Understand is not justify, it's exactly the contrary. Only, we go back to your first question, only if we understand the past, only if we understand how a guy like Hitler came to power, maybe we can prevent it to happen again. Mm-hmm. Maybe. If we decide that this is not important, that Hitler was a monster, that, German people were just crazy at that moment, and then maybe it's going to happen again. Mm-hmm. That's why the past is so useful, can be so useful.
You also pose more questions about the other character in The Soldiers of Salamis. He is, when you meet him, 82 years old, a former Catalan communist named Miralles. He was a worker recruited into the army of the Republic. A lone soldier, you tell us, who marched through Libya, the deserts of Libya, and was in Paris at the time of its liberation. You're fascinated by this character. His body is dilapidated. He stepped on a mine, miraculously survived. Someone who spent his whole life cursing the Catholic Church, but ends his days in a senior citizens' home run by nuns who prevent him from smoking. For him, it's a great indignity. A one-eyed, practically one-eyed man dying, looks as though a truck has run over him, you tell us. And yet, the fascination with Miralles is that, is that he poses for you, again, more questions than answers. And it's here that you raise the question of heroes.
Yeah.
And you suggest at one point in this Soldiers of Salamis that maybe the true hero, like Miralles, forgotten, a fighter for freedom and later democracy, is that he has staying power. Courage, honesty, but he stays the course, despite everything. And this is puzzling, is it not? What does it tell us? What does his character tell us? Pure as pure, you say at one point, and yet the man is utterly broken, a survivor, near death, whom you track down.
Well, I don't know. This character tells us that I mean, human nature is not something... we do awful things, but it is possible to be decent. To be, you know, human nature is not that bad. We can do better. This is the best possibility of being human I know. Being brave and honest. It is a mistake to think that the real character, the real protagonist of the book, you don't say that. But a lot of people reading this book say that the main character is Sánchez Mazas, because this Miralles only appears at the end of the book. But Sánchez Mazas, the fascist, is only what Alfred Hitchcock would call a MacGuffin, you know, a trick. Apparently, this was a technique Hitchcock used all the time. Apparently, he's going to tell you one story, the story of one character, and then at the end, you discover that he's telling you another story. So the main character of the book is this one. And what I can say about, I mean, I don't know what I can say about this character. I began the book with this image of these two guys, you know, a young soldier at the end of the Civil War, in a moment in which he should kill this fascist, which was in a bad position after escaping a fusillade and so on and so forth. And I had these two men, you know, one in front of the other, looking at their eyes, and this young guy, in the moment of killing this other guy, and decided not to kill him. And I had this to begin with, the book. And I began, and at the end, it appeared, this guy, this soldier, at the end of the book, appears. And when I say appears, I'm saying that it is the only time in my life that the character takes life by himself. I know that all novelists talk about this, and I know that it seems romantic, the idea that the character has his own life apart from the author. But it's true, in the sense that, I can explain that, in the sense that writing a novel is like organizing a play, to play a game with certain rules. And and every book has different rules. And when you are playing this game with these rules, there is a moment in which you cannot, you know, use other rules. You must stick to these rules. And then the book leads you to places where you didn't even know that you wanted to go. So this character appeared there, and he spoke by himself, and blah, blah, blah. And what I can say is that is the best possibility of human being.
But something else is going on. I mean, the character of Miralles is important because you are rescuing someone from oblivion.
Yeah.
Walter Benjamin, who ended his life in this episode in Poor Bull, famously wrote that history is always the history of the victors.
Yeah.
And that not even the dead are safe from the living when victory comes. Against that, you resuscitate, you revive for posterity a figure, broken down, frail, an old communist who hugs you at the end with his walking stick on the ground. Someone who is decent, honest, had one idea that fascism should not prevail, and who gave his life for this. It's tremendously powerful. Is Miralles, by the way, not Spain?
What do you mean?
The injustice suffered by those in the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
And the pact of forgetting.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
This novel is a defiant act against that.
In
the figure of Miralles.
Oh, yeah. It's trying to resuscitate a possibility, the best possibility of Spain. You can read the book like this. The best possibility.
Or anywhere.
Or
anywhere.
Anywhere, oh yeah. That's why I say it's the best possibility of human being I can conceive.
What kind of human being is he?
Well, okay.
He's not a believer in communism.
No, I mean it's a hero in what sense? All the book is a reflection on. It's going around the idea of the hero. What is a hero? It's difficult to say in abstract terms, but I would say that it has two things at least. Two things at least. One is courage, and courage is something important. I think that precisely fascism has corrupted the idea of courage, physical courage. It's something serious. I mean, you can do bad things with courage and good things with courage. But you can do bad things with intelligence and good things with intelligence. Courage is a virtue, essential virtue for the hero. But let me tell you one thing before. This courage, in this case, is a courage not to kill somebody. I mean, he's a free man. Miralles is a free man. In what sense? Albert Camus said, what is a free man? He's a man who says no. And my heroes are people who say no. Miralles doesn't kill a man. Adolfo Suarez, in the last book, doesn't die for cover. He stays in his place. So, I mean, I love people who say no. It's the most difficult thing to say. And instead, in The Speed of Light, which is another reflection on this subject, it's a guy who says, in a moment, say yes. And he condemns himself. Okay, so courage. Courage to say no. And there's another thing, which is a mystery for me, but it's essential. In the book, it's called The Instinct of Virtue. So, Miralles is not an intellectual. Sanchez Mazas is an intellectual, and we could talk about that. But he's not an intellectual. He's not a cultivated guy or whatever. He's just a worker. But he has this thing called the instinct of virtue. So there's some people who, at least at the important moments, smell where is the right or where is the wrong. There is such a thing called good and evil. It does exist. We sometimes deceive ourselves saying, well, the good and the bad, it's not so clear, but we know where is it. In fact, we know. And this guy knows it. And he does it. Without, wanting to be in the photograph, without just doing it. And he finishes in oblivion. Yeah, but he's not, I mean, he's done what he wants. And he likes life. Oh, that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. He loves life. I mean, that's what is, there is this I mean, he loves life. I mean, he loves wine, women, you know, the good things of life. There is this quotation by Hesiod at the beginning of the book, which says, the gods desire to keep the stuff of life hidden from us. Los dioses, the gods, hide, los dioses ocultan lo que hace vivir a los hombres. I prefer my Spanish. So the gods conceal what is more important. That's the quotation. That's the epigraph. And what is that thing that is so important? La joie de vivre. So the fact that we are alive. And this is wonderful. We are here in Sydney, and we're having, after this, we're going to have wine, Australian wine, and we're alive. And this is incredible. The fact that we are alive is so we are not conscious of that. And the miracle of being alive, it's incredible. Why us and not others, and why, you know. And this guy is especially conscious of this thing. And that's why he knows that killing is bad. That if you kill a man, even if he's your enemy, if he's a bastard, if he's a guy who has big responsibilities in this orgy of blood, you're killing humanity, in a sense. I mean, from a political point of view, it could be, you can imagine that he deserves death. I don't know. But from a moral point of view, nobody deserves death. Not even Gaddafi. Not even Saddam Hussein. From a moral point of view, this is bad.
Our audience, it's a miracle our audience is still here and alive.
Yeah.
Pushed into oblivion. What I'd like to do now is open it up. We have probably a quarter of an hour or so for questions. There are roaming mics.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was magnificent. I just have one question. Javier Cercas is obviously a very complex man. You're a hybrid creature. You're a novelist. I'm not sure whether you're a novelist, you're a historian, you're many things when I read your novels. I'm not sure whether they're novels or they're history or they're essays or they're moral expositions, but in the film version of your book, Javier Cercas is turned into a woman. And I was wondering how you feel about being transformed into a woman in the film, and whether you had a say in the transformation of the writer Javier Cercas into a female in the very good film version of your novel.
Yeah.
Soldados de Salamina.
Yeah. Well, when the director of the film asked me to do it, I said, yeah, okay, you're crazy, but anyway, do it. Because I thought it was impossible to make a film out of it. And I still think it's impossible. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, and when he told me that Javier Cercas was going to be a woman, it was his woman. I mean, his girl. Now they're separated. Now at that time, not because of the film. And he told me, what's your opinion? Well, I told him, well, I think it's okay. I'm more beautiful, but she's the best actress, so no problem. She acts better than me, though I'm more sexy, but anyway. So my answer is that, I mean, one thing is the novel, and another thing is the film. The film is just this is obvious. Every reader makes his own book. A book is a novel is a partitura. How you say that in English? Script, like music, right? So everyone makes the interpretation he wants, and every interpretation is I accept every interpretation. So, and he made his interpretation of the book in the movie, and that's it. I mean, it's very simple. I told him, you do your film. Forget about me. Of course, I went to the shooting because they were close to home, and I thought that shootings were, you know, fantastic moments to, you know people and girls, wonderful girls, and it was totally false, of course. So that's it. I mean, total freedom for him. And then I discovered that all in Spain, all novelists whose novels have been put in the film finally quarreled, I mean, with the director. And I thought, I'm not going to be like that, just to fuck them, you know. I mean, and so we're friends right now. He's separated from the woman, and I'm still with him. I don't know.
Someone else, please.
I was wondering, given your Borgian quotation that those that allow themselves to be deceived are wiser than the ones that try to deceive us. And given your comment about Garzón's trial, I was wondering whether you were making also a comment about the social context, the Spanish society, whether you think that maybe hasn't been very wise to go Garzón path.
Yeah, so the question is, could you comment about the actions of Baltasar Garzón, who, for those of you who may not know, is a brave judge who, during the Zapatero period, with the change of law, began to pursue a case or to open up the whole question of the civil war. A figure also who was involved in the extradition, arrest and extradition of Pinochet. So the question is, I mean, what is your impression of Garzón and the significance of Garzón? And is it that you have reservations in your writings and comments about this particular move that Garzón has made and himself has ended up in court?
Not at all. I don't have... I mean, my reservation is this one. It shouldn't be Garzón what Garzón tried to do was something that this state, meaning the state, the government, should have made 20 years before. What is that? It's the fact that we have I don't know how to explain that in English, but we have mass graves in our country. More than 100,000 people that they are unidentified. Okay, this is impossible for a real democracy, for a decent country. This is impossible. I understand that in the 70s, or even in the 80s, no, in the 70s, when the transition to democracy, to dictatorship, from dictatorship to democracy, this was impossible to do. Because if you do that, the civil war is immediate, and the army wouldn't accept that, that's for sure. So let's understand that it happened, let's accept that this is logical from a political point of view and from, the health from the whole country and so on and so forth. But, what we should have done is very easy, is to pay with our money, when we had money, so 10 years ago, but we had money to pay that, every people who had their parents in the, there in the mass graves, identify them and put honorably in a place where they can be mourned and so on and so forth. So as the state didn't do that, Garzón tried to do that in a very, Garzón finally has been absolved of this thing yesterday when I was flying. Mm-hmm. He has been condemned. I think that Garzón, who is probably the most famous judge in the world, I would say, one of them at least, is very important. What he did with Pinochet was extraordinary. His fight against, extraordinary. His fight against the terrorist movement in Spain is extraordinary. A lot of things. I don't think that he is a saint. I don't think that he is a saint. And I think that in a little country as Spain, when you are really famous and important and so on and so forth, you get a lot of enemies and they want to kill you. And they have killed him. I mean, they have put him out. I believe that the human factor is essential. Is essential. I mean, all his comrades didn't like him, from the left, from the right, and have decided to go to him. He did mistakes, yes, and they took profit of these mistakes to kill him, to get rid of him. That's my vision of the case. Having said that, what Garzón didn't want, that's an idea that some people have, is to make a process of Franquism and Franco and so on and so forth. He didn't want that. At the beginning it seemed that he wanted, but he didn't want that because it is impossible. I'd love to see Franco, in jail, in judge, or even, facing a firing squad or something like that. But there is a little problem. He died, 75. It's a long time ago. And most of his comrades, well, all of them are dead. So it is impossible. When this story of Garzón arrived, I remember Margaret Atwood arrived to Spain for a prize or whatever, and some people asked her about this Garzón, wanted to judge Franco and all the Franco era, and she said, a little late, isn't it? So we didn't do, come on.
Javier, Vicky Greaves from Gender and Cultural Studies. Thank you so much. It's really delightful to have you here to talk about your work with us. One thing that I want to ask you about is that it seemed to me in the discussion tonight that you were drawing a dichotomy between history and literature, in that you were speaking as if there is truth in history. That really concerns me because I think that history is open to so many vagaries and it really becomes a fiction or an artefact that is produced by certain people or cultures, societies at certain times to satisfy their own needs, and that as such it, I know that history relies perhaps more than literature on sources of what is called fact, but even those are open to corruption, if you like, and there's always the choice of what records are to be left and what are to be destroyed and so on and so forth. So I put it to you that in fact we really do not know what has happened in the past, and that in fact historians, like writers of literature, historical fiction, are actually recreating a kind of past that suits them or suits the society and culture of which they are a part at the time. And that in fact this writing tells us more about people of the present than it does about people of the past.
You're telling a lie when you say that literary history can describe the past as it really was.
History cannot describe the past as exactly as it really was. History tries to do it, fights to do it, but it doesn't do it, of course. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't understand your exact words, some of it. That was the question? More or less, yeah?
Faithfully reproduced.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And
Very quickly, we've got a couple of other questions, and then we should draw.
let's say that fiction and history try to look for the truth, but with different instruments. Let's say it like this. And we know that truth, we cannot grasp the truth. We cannot, not the historian, but we fight for it. That's what I think.
Okay, we have a question.
My name is Gośka Cabezas. I'm Polish, and I would describe Poles, because of our history, having one thing in common, being defiant. What would you say about the Spanish people?
Tell us, please, the essence of what it is to be Spanish.
There is no essence. The essence is that there is no essence. I don't believe in essence. Really. I don't believe, I know that people think, what is to be Spanish? Okay, to be a bullfighter and to go, around the streets and cry out loud and, And what is being English? Being like, no, I don't believe in...
But there must be something that is characteristic for, because I'm fascinated by Spanish people, by Spain. I see Spanish people as people of contradictions, of very strong. That's why they fight, probably. And there must be one thing that you could describe.
Okay, I remember this great actor called, the greatest actor in Spain, called Fernando Fernán Gómez. And talking to this great actor, whose name I cannot pronounce, but who was the main character in a lot of Bergman's movies, so from Sweden. And these great actors met themselves at 80 or something like that, and Fernando Fernán Gómez told him, you know, my friend, that in Spain, the national sin is la envidia, envy, isn't it? Envy. And Erlandsson was his name, this Swedish actor told him, oh, really? So, in Sweden is exactly the same thing. So I think that, I don't believe in essence. I don't believe in that. I think that this is a romantic creation, romantic in the strong sense of the word, the Volksgeist. It's a word by Herder, meaning the spirit of the people, of the country. So Herder and the Romantics thought that there was a spirit of the countries that traveled along the millenniums or along the time and was the same thing, And we Spanish were the same thing. We were toreros in back then, and still we are, or we are contradictory. Human nature is contradictory. And I don't believe in that. I think this is a romantic idea and a very dangerous idea, I would say. Nationalism, which is for me, it is our great enemy in this time of humanity, I would say, springs from this idea. I don't believe in that. Of course, there are moments in which right now, we Spanish are in a certain way, we are of a certain type. There are certain traits right now going on in Spain. But I don't think this is the essence of a country. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that.
Thank you. There is a question.
Thank you. Dick Burr from the Centre of English Teaching. I want to pick up on what you're saying about fiction and history and story, okay, and how this applies to other media, for example, photography. The most famous image of the Spanish Civil War is Robert Capa's photograph of the death of the Loyalist militiaman, but it's almost certainly faked. Almost certainly. Now, how do you feel about that? Do you think Capa was justified in what he did? And how does that relate? How does that relate to what you're saying about the novel?
It's about other media, such as photography. Could you comment about fiction, storytelling, history, when it comes to other media, other than the novel?
Do you know Robert Capa's photograph?
Robert Capa's
yes.
photograph.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
So it's, as an example.
Yeah. what can I say about that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. About photography.
What do you think is justified in that particular art?
Justified? You mean the fact that he made up the photograph, this famous photograph? No. Oh, okay, okay. Yes, you're talking about this famous photograph in which there is the militiaman who is being killed. Okay. And that lately it has been demonstrated, almost demonstrated, and it's possible, that this is a fiction, this is is made up. I don't think this is okay. I mean, from a professional point of view, I don't think it is necessary. You might say, well, but it was the icon of the Spanish Civil War, meaning it was in Life, I think, in the first page of Life, and, you know, yes, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that from a, I mean, obviously from a professional point of view, he cheated. He said that it was truth what it wasn't. It is not the same with a novelist. A novelist, of course, when you read a novel, you know that you are reading fiction and you are preparing yourself for something. No, it's different. And well, I don't know. I don't know. If the result is good, I don't have a clear opinion on that. If the result is good, why not? I mean, probably. Do you think is this the question? For instance, Robinson Crusoe. Lots of people, everybody thought at that time when the book was published that the book was a chronicle. And in fact, it was not. It was a fiction. I don't know. There is a famous book in Spain which is incredibly not famous around the world because it's the second, well, it's called Lazarillo de Tormes, which is a picaresque, the beginning of the picaresque novel in Spain. Everybody thought that it was true. And, well, I don't know. I mean, Borges, Pierre Menard, author of El Quijote, which is one of his most celebrated short stories, everybody thought that it was an essay. And it was a real character, this Pierre Menard. And I think that in a lot of, I don't know, in British Encyclopedia or something like that exists as a character, a real character. Well, I don't know. I don't have an opinion of that.
We have to draw this to an end. I have one question and want to ask your opinion of this question which you yourself raise. Of all the stories in history, you write, the saddest is Spain's because it ends badly. And then you quickly ask, does it end badly?
Well, all histories end badly because we die. But that was a poem written by a great poet, Spanish poet called Jaime Gil de Viedma, during the Franco's dictatorship. And that's why he said that it ends badly. And I asked, it ends badly? I don't think that it ends badly. Because, why? I want to finish with this. The last 30 years in Spain, including this awful crisis, have been the most prosperous freedom, with the most freedom, maximum freedom and prosperity of the 3 last centuries. And this is extraordinary. We haven't had freedom for such a long period in our history. So, and we are right now in Europe, which was our goal. You know, the goal of all the illustrated, of all the, you know, intelligent people in Spain during 3 centuries. So the end is not bad in that moment. We have this crisis. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very generous.
Well, the audience weren't asked to applaud, and I think it's been an extraordinary evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Javier Cercas. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Very generous.